Hey everybody, welcome back. I am your host, Joe Foster, and today I'm going to go back on soap operas for a moment and discuss the idea of a topic suggested by Chris Lynch of what would I rewrite and why. Well, the thing is, with me, I wouldn't rewrite almost any of it, and because rewrites themselves tend to create issues because it's the same as retconning a character as it's known in movies. You change their history, you need to figure out how that change affects them later on down the line, which is why I'm against rewrites and remakes a lot of the time. Like with the movies Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. Both got what's known as a reboot, which is essentially a remake, and neither one did as well as the original in comparison. They were neither one as accurate or as kept up with on the story because they changed the story. And that's a problem, in my opinion. When you do a story, one of the reasons you do it is you tell it a certain way so that you can make the character a hero, a villain, or show how much of a normal person they can be. And in doing so, when you do the change, you change that. Because just like in real life, everybody you meet, everybody you talk to, anybody you care about, anybody you hate, they have an influence on how you act. And because of that, it changes things. It changes you personally. It goes the same for the characters. In soap operas or daytime dramas, this is a big issue because, like with Jason Quartermain, when they did his wreck, and he became Jason Morgan afterwards, a lot of people were mad because he didn't show any signs of being Jason Quartermain, but they didn't take into account how the story had actually covered that. The brain damage he incurred had gave him pre I can't remember the exact medical term for it, but it doesn't allow for them to have any memories of the past. He had complete amnesia due to the accident, and it didn't come back to him. And later on, they made it to where it started to come back. But the reason why I was able to accept it the way they started doing this was because they showed the effects of his mind fighting against itself by bringing the old memories in along with the new ones. And how that in itself created a trauma in Jason's body where he couldn't handle it, and it started giving him fits and episodes. And that to me is good storytelling. Bad storytelling would be like how they did with certain characters where, oh, this character is doing this, and then they leave, and then they come back, and suddenly they're doing something else altogether because that's what they do. They decided to change whatever they were doing and went with something new when they came back. I can't really think of an example at the moment, but they have done it. And this is in primetime dramas as well. This has happened. Which is why, and even in comedies and things like that, they do this and they act like it's nothing big without thinking about how it affects the characters. And that's why I'm so against rewrites a lot of the time and retconning a character's history. Like with the giving Todd Manning a brother suddenly in Victor Lord Jr., who replaced him, who in real life was originally written in by Trevor St. John, when he was brought in, was to play Todd Manning. But when they found out they were getting Roger Howarth back, suddenly One Life to Live came up with a new idea. Hey, let's retcon the history and have it that Todd had a brother all this time he didn't know about, and Irene's been alive. And because this makes it even more apparent that she didn't care about her children. That Irene didn't care about her children, and that Victor and Todd were just items to be used. The thing she wanted most about Todd, the only time she wanted anything to do with Todd was because Victor's money suddenly came into play, as well as that little item he was said to have on him at the time when they changed his history for why he got taken hostage at the time and disappeared for all those years. Until Roger Howard's return, when they did the storyline with it, explained all this and gave him and said that suddenly he had a twin, which Trevor St. John's character became, which to me, as much as I prefer Roger Howarth over Trevor St. John, it was an insult to the character in doing so. Because thereby you're changing his history and making him look like he was nothing more than a puppet or a zombie who could only follow orders. He might as well just had shackles on his wrists and been blue and named Genie for what you guys did to him for that. Also, another reason not to change characters' histories or not change their histories, it affects their personalities, as I stated earlier. Like in real life, the people you meet, the people you hate, you love, that you get into fights with, that you get along with so well, people you call your best friends, the people you in relationships with, the people you lose, it affects who you are. Well, this includes your personality. And in changing a person's history, you change that about them. There's no reason for them to have that action now if that part gets changed. Now I'm going to go over some examples, which, so this video might be shorter than all the others because of this, but now I'm going to go over examples of things I've heard that people would like to have changed and how it would have affected certain things and how it would have affected from the history to the present, and not just something simple of, oh, do this and it works out well. First example of this, Frisco and Felicia having stayed in Port Charles and raised Maxie and Georgie rather than going off around the world. While Felicia was known to have stayed a couple of times, she eventually got tired of the town and went off because she was love-struck with Frisco so much that it could have been considered borderline obsessive because she chose him over her children and she couldn't stay in Port Charles. Frisco, on the other hand, his personality would not allow for it. The guy was a good cop and a good agent. He was not made to be father material in that way. He can't, he's like Luke Spencer in that he can't stay in one place too long or he gets bored, or like Luke, he could have developed a habit of some type, such as Luke's drinking got more and more excessive the more he stayed in one place. Because when they stay in one place, they're forced to face things, and a lot of times they can't handle that. With Frisco, him going down a darker path might have been worse than Luke's. Because at least with Luke's dark path, it made sense on some of it. With Frisco, his dark path could have led to an abusive parenting style because he can't stand being in one place for too long. He liked the action. He liked being on the road. So him traveling would have made sense in that aspect. By him leaving, it gave him time to do what he enjoyed, and when he came back, he could be the doting parent that he wanted to be. But this also created a negative effect when he did this, though he didn't realize it. Felicia did, however, which is what made them different. And they're leaving, much like Anna and Robert's, like what Scorpio's did with Robin, it allowed for Scorpio to be shown, to shine as a parent and show how much he enjoyed, make him more enjoyable to the fans, and showing that he cared and that he could step up and be this great person rather than just being a one-dimensional character of a cop who believed in doing what was right all the time. And plus, this also showed, in comparison, how Frisco and Felicia and Robert and Anna could have been seen as irresponsible in that aspect because they chose their careers and their love interest over who they over their children. So, but when Robert and Anna and Frisco and Felicia chose to do what they did, which was leave, it also made it easier to come up with new things for them when they came back. And something a lot of people don't think about when they think about Frisco and Felicia staying and raising Maxie and Georgie rather than leaving is how it would have affected Maxie, Georgie, and Robin. With Maxie, a lot of her issues as a child where she acted out, was out partying, getting in trouble, things like that, came from her abandonment issues by her parents. A little bit, and I do mean a little bit, came from survivor's guilt from the heart she got from BJ during that storyline after the bus crash. Well, something they leave out is that her wild child phase was mainly in part due to her wanting her parents' attention and love and feeling like she was not good enough. So she ended up becoming this wild child due to the abandonment issues created by that, of self-esteem, things like that. Whereas Georgie went the opposite way and became more dependable and more reliant, meaning more reliable than others. Because in her mind, Maxie was going too far one way, but she was doing the right thing. But Georgie went too far the other way, and while being dependable and reliable, she didn't get to experience the childhood life that she should have, though she had Mac raising her. Because a lot of times she was trying to help out Maxie in some way and ended up trapped in that situation. So that's why it led to problems there. And Maxie, during her wild child phase, as I'm referring to it, believed she didn't do anything wrong even when she did. This especially applied during the Lucky Spencer storyline where he had a pill addiction. She kept him in pills because she thought she had a genuine connection to him, though he was married to Elizabeth and she knew she was destroying their marriage. Georgie kept trying to talk her out of it. And Georgie always wanted to see the best in people, so that's what led to her problem. That also led to one of her problems created by the parents' abandonment issues that they gave to them. Is that while Georgie wanted to see the best, Maxie would usually see the worst and how to exploit it to her advantage. And Georgie tried to be a big sister to Maxie more than Maxie was to Georgie, though Maxie did actually care for Georgie a lot. As it was revealed throughout time. But also, something a lot of people don't think about is that if Frisco and Felicia had stayed, Mac wouldn't have raised Maxie and Georgie, and therefore Maxie, Georgie, and Robin would not be as close as they were. Instead of being instead of being like sisters as they were, they would have been at most like cousins, if anything, because there is no actual blood tie for Robin to Georgie and Maxie. Yes, the Scorpios do have a relation with the Joneses by one family member, but it's neither of them. But the main characters are not actually related by blood in that way with Maxie, Georgie, and Robin. Maxie and Georgie are sisters, but to Robin, they could have been complete strangers, and if Mac hadn't been raising them, Robin more than likely wouldn't have gotten to know them because their age difference was so big between them. This also brings me to my next idea of how changes occur. How if you change something, it changes other things. And that's Georgie's death in the series. Now, me personally, I would love to rewrite this because I thought it was sad that they killed her off and it was wrong in the way they did it, especially since they killed off a main character only a month before, thinking it was a good idea for storyline purposes, and this was one of the worst storylines they'd done. It's what was known as the text message killer, which to me was the knockoff of All My Children's, either All My Children or One Life to Live, whichever one had like the literal highlight killer, had like the little knot, like I forget what it's actually called that they were using, but it was like a ribbon tied at each murder scene, proving that the person had done it, as well as the murder they had occur on the other show. I mean, they did this on every show. They had some type of serial killer that was out, but with the text message killer, it was worse because they rewrote the character's history in order to make it make sense for why this character turned out the way they did, even though they didn't act like this when they disappeared from the show originally, before they made their reappearance as the killer. Okay, and like I said, with Georgie's death, as much as I'd love to react, because I love the character of Georgie Jones, I can't bring myself to do that for that reason, because I respect the character too much and love the character that much that changing it alters them. But anyways, as to how it changed it. With Georgie's death, Maxie became a more dependable person and grew out of her wild child phase. Without Georgie's death, she has no reason to grow up, in a sense. She was still stayed that wild child who was, and probably would have gotten in more trouble if not ending up dead somehow on the show because of the trouble she got into. And the couple known as Spixie, or Spinelli and Maxie, may not have happened because while Spinelli became more brave after Georgie's death, but also the Spinelli and Georgie couple could have happened instead, because as it was revealed after her death, Georgie had actually been holding them feelings towards Spinelli. But Spinelli didn't realize it because he had feelings towards Maxie and Lulu and couldn't decide between them, though he was more attached at this time to Lulu than he was to Maxie. Another thing that came out of this that most people don't realize, Maxie and Lulu's friendship that they have today would not have happened. Because at this point, with good reason, Lulu and Maxie couldn't stand each other. And they would fight anytime they saw each other. Georgie was actually the one between them that kept them normal and kept things decent. But without Georgie's death, Georgie would have either eventually given up trying to stop them from fighting, or she would have let them have it out. But either way, because Maxie and Lulu both changed after the death to become more like the people they are today, or to grow up, basically, without Georgie's death, they would see no reason in it, and these two would have been at each other's throats more than likely, rather than eventually coming to some sort of terms of agreement. Because if you look at it, even in their storyline where Lulu got pregnant by Dylan, who was Georgie's ex, when that occurred, Maxie had faked a pregnancy that almost destroyed Lucky. And, almost destroyed Lucky even more, and Lulu had an abortion in this storyline, which also hurt Lucky, and they're arguing over which one hurt him more. But when Lulu initially got pregnant and was going to have the child, was considering whether to have the child or not, Maxie was giving her all this hell over it, and as they came to an agreement, eventually, thanks in part to Dylan being a mediator between them, with Georgie, Maxie would say that Georgie had a problem with Lulu, whether Georgie was actually saying anything or actually did or not. Though Georgie had a good reason to have an issue with Lulu. But still, with the idea of this, Maxie was saying that Georgie had this problem with Lulu and how Lulu was like this and Lulu was that. And Lulu actually confronted Georgie about this one day, telling her, if you got a problem with me, go ahead and say it. Let's have it out. And Maxie jumped in saying Georgie was too nice a person. Didn't even give Georgie the chance to actually speak her mind. And that's when Dylan stepped in and came to this eventual truce between them all, where Georgie and Lulu were actually nice to her, and Maxie, by way of Lulu, was actually nice as well. Only after Lulu had the abortion did things go downhill, and they went back to fighting. But Georgie's death eventually occurred, and while Lulu and Maxie would still fight over time, it wasn't nearly as bad as it was during this time. And they eventually found a common point and ended up bonding and becoming the friends we know them as today. And if it hadn't been for Georgie's death, Felicia would not be with Mac. Yes, they had tried in the past and it didn't work out. This is because Felicia was so in love with Frisco, she couldn't see the damage that she was causing her children or the idea of what she was actually doing with her life and how much she was actually giving up. Eventually, when she came back to Port Charles after Georgie's death, she wanted to have a relationship with Maxie still, since she had lost Georgie and didn't know her at all. And when her and Maxie had it out, she realized this, was she wanted to have a relationship with Maxie before it was too late, and despite how much time they had lost. At first, Maxie was against this, thinking Mother didn't deserve it for all the years that she would spend chasing Frisco around and going around the world instead of being at home taking care and raising her children, teaching them the right things, and leaving it all up to their Uncle Mac as Georgie and Maxie would refer to him, because to them and Max even admits it, that Mac was more of a parent figure than Frisco and Felicia could ever have been, thinking of themselves, and they shouldn't try to fool themselves into thinking that they did the right thing by doing that, because they made the choice that they did to leave the children with Mac and go off and live this lifestyle. And at first, Felicia was destroyed, and Maxie had a little bit of enjoyment from it. But eventually, Maxie came to regret that, and because of her growing up from being that wild child problem character, she eventually came around to her mother, and they actually bonded, and they grew into being as close as they were now. And Mac and Felicia ended up having a relationship, and Felicia ended up realizing all the stuff she missed out on, all the trouble that had been caused by her leaving, and seeing that her and Frisco were not made to be a couple. As much as she would love it, and as much as fans would love it, her and Mac made more sense as a couple, because she could actually handle staying in one place for a given period of time and wanting to be with her children. Whereas Frisco, the only time he actually showed real interest in Felicia in the last 20 years was when Mac decided he wanted to marry Felicia, and they'd actually gotten into a relationship. Frisco found out, and in his jealousy, little ego buster of his, he decided he was going to break them up, and he was going to win Felicia back. Only it didn't work out for him, and we got the couple of Mac and Felicia that exists today that actually makes sense. Frisco didn't think about how breaking up Mac and Felicia would have affected Maxie. He is self-serving in his ego to that. Maxie, on the other hand, saw how good how good Mac and Felicia were together over time, and she actually thought it was a good idea for them to stay together, and even told her father to back off. Yes, her father did a couple of good things when he came back, but overall, he was trying to serve his own ego, which is a problem. Maxie, by then, had grown out of that phase and was now actually herself becoming a better person, and had become friends with Lulu, had a good job, and yet had friends and family she cared about and actually wanted to be around. Frisco, for the brief time he was there, yes, she loves him as her father, and she always will. but she cannot accept him as a parent because of the way he was. And she wants him to be in her children's lives. But it shows how responsible and how well she grew up, not how much of an influence Frisco and Felicia had on her. That was due to Mac's influence more than anything, as well as Robin's and Georgie's. Also, another side effect of Georgie not dying, Dylan and Kiki probably wouldn't have happened, as Dylan would have wanted to be with Georgie and more than likely been with her more often as a couple, and they would have probably wound up in a new love triangle, in a more modern version of the love triangle of with Diego Alcazar. That was like the Carly and Sonny versus Carly and Jack's love triangle, or the Carly and Alcazar, Carly and Sonny love triangle. You take your view on which way you want to look at it. You can leave it in the comments as to how you think that one would have played. But I see it as being between those two relationships of Carly's that it would have fit with Diego and Dylan being trapped, having Georgie trapped between them, where she couldn't decide. Personally, I think her and Dylan were a better couple, but her and Diego were not bad. They were actually good because she brought out the good side of Diego and made him more caring. Whereas Dylan got Georgie to act more like a normal person, having some wild moments of her own, and being able to live free and not be trapped by responsibility and things like that. But Dylan himself was like Diego in that he was doing all these things because he was acting out like Maxie towards the feelings of abandonment issues that he was having, even though Tracy had never left him. He was forced to go with her wherever she went, and he got left and was treated more like luggage than a child. So he saw no reason to be good. And Georgie made him want to be the better person, the person that everybody came to know eventually that was a good person. Now, with Georgie's death, there's also 3 minimum alternatives I've come up with that involve the text message killer idea. Storyline part of it that's involved. Option A, Diego would have killed Maxie that night because Georgie would have let her sister know about the text, meaning Maxie would have went to the site, and instead of her getting murdered, it would have been Maxie that got, instead of Georgie getting murdered, it would have been Maxie that got killed. This also would mean that there would be no Georgie Spinelli, who was named after Georgie when that occurred, when she was born. And there would have been no James West, named after Maxie's relationship with Nathan, which resulted in that son being born. Option B, Diego would have been caught sooner, as Georgie was more caring about the law and respect for it, so she would have turned him in after surviving the attack. And this would have also ended any chance of the Diego and Georgie having a relationship, as he was trying to kill Maxie, and he had killed Emily and Layla, who were friends to Georgie. People Georgie actually cared about were killed by Diego, so she would have thought he was too far gone by having committed these murders and wanted nothing to do with him. And option C was Georgie feels sorry for him and wonders why her dating choices, with Diego and Dylan as the biggest examples, neither ended well. And either she would have ended up leaving the show to see the world storyline, like with Elizabeth's oldest sister, Sarah, where she went on to move over to Europe. Well, Georgie probably would have done the same thing, went to college out of city, out of state, or something like that, and that probably would have been the last we saw of her. Or they would have had her in some accident that ended up killing her or putting her into a coma, since they had so little of storylines to do for Georgie at this time. For the character of Georgie at this time. And one big effect people don't realize, Emma would not have been born when she was. Emma Drake Scorpio would not have been born at the time she was, because Scrubs, as they're known, or Robin Scorpio and Patrick Drake, they got back together after Georgie's death because Emma was conceived during Robin's suffering and grieving from Emma's death and Patrick comforting her. So if Georgie didn't die, Robin and Patrick wouldn't have been together because Robin wanted a child and Patrick didn't. And that's what led to the initial breakup. But because of this, but if that death hadn't occurred and that didn't happen, Patrick wouldn't have been the father to the child. Wouldn't have been Emma's father from their one night stand deal. And instead of a sperm donor, as Robin had initially planned to do. And so you wouldn't have even had, so you might not even have had Scrubs together. Back together, and they might have ended up with different people. Which would mean Emma wouldn't have been born at all. But they, at least, as the minimum, Emma wouldn't have been born at the time she was if Georgie's death hadn't occurred. Another thing. Okay, sorry, I already discussed this. That was Mac and Felicia's being together. And how it forced Felicia to look at her past and realize what she'd done wrong and have the relationship with Maxie, and Frisco and her wouldn't have worked for that reason. Okay, now his third one deals with One Life to Live rather than General Hospital, and it's Todd Manning's rape or sexual assault of Marty. Gang rape or gang sexual assault of Marty in college. I know there's people out there who see these two as a couple and think it'd be great. I can't do that because of certain reasons, and it doesn't work because of their personalities. But, okay, like one example, if Todd hadn't raped Marty, he wouldn't have seen the need to change how he acted, because the rape of Marty led to him going to jail. It led to him being taken to jail and getting released on parole, which then led to Powell Lord's attacks at the hospitals. At the hospital he worked at, where everybody thought Todd was guilty, eventually leading to them revealing that Powell was actually the attacker. And when Todd went to stop him, Powell stuck a sweatband or a dirty sock, something like that, in Todd's mouth and held a gun to him, making him beg for his life. And Todd realized what he had put Marty through and how much of a monster he had been to her, and how he needed to change because of that, because he didn't want to be that person and be the thing he was most remembered for. And also, Todd wouldn't have been able to escape the hold Peter Manning had over him. Because when Todd was convicted of the rapes and then sent to the hospital, when he got sent to prison before escaping, and then eventually getting his parole and got the job at the Lambview Hospital, Peter Manning still held on to Todd and had this major control with him. Well, when Todd was working at the hospital, Peter Manning disowned him, essentially, and wanted nothing to do with him, and was willing to even help people who were falsely accusing Todd of these attacks with no evidence because of what had happened with Marty, proving how little he actually cared for him. But also during this time, there was a storyline going where Tina was trying to inherit the money that Victor Lord Sr. had left to his illegitimate son. And yes, I say illegitimate son because at this time they had not made it that Todd had a twin brother that nobody knew about. And nobody knew that Todd had actually been Victor's illegitimate son. All they knew is that they had a diary that proved that Irene Manning had a son. Tina wanted the money because Victor left her with nothing. And she'd married Cord and had 2 children, CJ and Sarah. Sarah, who had actually I think it was at this point, was actually played by actress Hayden Panettiere, who most people would remember from Heroes and other things, and I Love You, Beth Cooper, among the other things that she's done. Also, the show Nashville, I think she was in. But anyways, at this time, I'm pretty sure she was in it, and she played Sarah, the younger sister, who was the daughter of Cord Manning, who was the daughter of Cord. Well, while Cord was having an affair with Blair, he was at least trying to keep it secret. Tina had come up with this diary idea that proved that, which is actually real, and Irene did have an illegitimate child by Victor Sr., a son. Well, this child would inherit $20-something million from him. Tina, thinking it was unfair that Vicky and this illegitimate child were going to get money, while she was the legitimate younger sister of of Vicky, got nothing. She thought it was unfair, so she decided she was going to get this share of the money. And that's actually how David came into the picture on One Life to Live. He was a con man that Tina had started seeing and had come up with this idea that they were going to make it where he claimed to be the illegitimate heir and collected the money. Unfortunately, something they didn't count on during this time was that Blair had actually discovered this. That not only was David faking this, but she actually figured out who the real legitimate heir, Todd, was. And this led to her trying to start a relationship with Todd, and eventually leading up to the reveal that he was in fact the heir, and that Peter Manning was his adoptive parent that had taken care of him. And I can't really say that it was adoptive, because according to Irene's story, she didn't want a child, so she dumped him on Peter and told him to take care of him. But Peter Manning was an abusive man. He was just about as bad as Victor was, as it would later be revealed in later storylines with Todd. But with Todd not raping Marty and it not being revealed that he was the illegitimate son eventually, Tina and David's plan would have worked, meaning David and Tina would have inherited the $20-something million and had that money to spend, and Tina probably would have left Cord, and her and David started a relationship, only for David to somehow figure out a way to con Tina out of the money and actually end up with all of it. Also, as I stated, part of what brought Blair and Todd together was her figuring out he was actually the true legitimate heir of Victor's money. And she wanted that, so she was going to marry him and get it when it was revealed. Well, she ended up marrying him. But something a lot of people aren't seeing about that means that if the rape hadn't occurred and that hadn't happened, Star and Jack wouldn't have been born at the time they were. And because when Blair got Todd to inherit the money, she also told him that she was pregnant. She also had him believing that she was pregnant by him, which turned out to be false, only for her to later actually get pregnant and have a miscarriage. And this was before Star. Well, if this hadn't happened, Todd would have stayed gone, and there would have been no marriage for Todd and Blair, which means there would have been no Star and Jack. Now, back to my thing on Peter Manning. Todd's abuse by Peter Manning would not have been discovered, as before the rape, sexual assault, I'm not sure what the correct term, but the situation is, as the two get intertwined, as the two get used with each other. I mean, used in place of each other a lot. But before that occurred, the idea of Todd Manning was actually to be scrapped because he wasn't doing well, because people didn't think he was doing well with fans. Well, then they did the rape, and the fans wanted to see more of what happened to him, thinking that he deserved punishment, and they wanted to see what happened to him. By doing the rape, they allowed for the eventual redemption storyline for Todd Manning, where he changed for at least a little while. But again, if Todd hadn't if they hadn't kept the character of Todd by doing the rape and having him go through that whole thing and actually scrapped his character as planned, that again means Star and Jack would not have been born. That also would have made it where it would have been no Danny, the daughter with Taya, or Danielle Manning as she's known, and there would have been no need for Trevor St. John's version of Todd to have existed, so there would have been no Manning children after Todd due to this. Blair also would not have changed because Todd's relationship with her is actually what changed her as a character, along with the having Star, Jack, Sam, and all of them. That's what changed her. She would probably still be having an affair with Cord while trying to figure out the next guy she was going to hunt down and marry in the town so that she could rob him of his wealth like she had done to Asa Buchanan at one point. I mean, she would have been one-dimensional character, and they would have gotten rid of her as quick as they could, eventually. And that also means Cassie DePaiva probably would not have been on ABC as long as she was, because she actually made the character of Blair important to people and more caring towards her. Since Blair wouldn't have been important, Cassie would have had no reason to stay, and they would have either put her on another show, or she would have found something better to do with her career, since the show had no need for it. And like I said, with Cord, that's an at-best situation. She would have been chasing him while trying to hunt down another guy for the money she was going to get him robbed out of. But I said that's an at-best. At worst, like I said, they would have written her off or killed her character and just moved on to the next one in line. Also, the character of Marty wouldn't have changed. A lot of people don't realize it, and it's something I noticed on the show when I went back and watched the old episodes of it. Especially here on YouTube, you can find a lot of them in the Todd Manning area phases. Marty, though she had moments of kindness, would at least in my view, be seen as the princess character, where everybody cared about her and put her up on this pedestal, rather than trying to treat her like a normal person. But unfortunately, the rape would have kept her from her and Patrick being together, because the rape that occurred drove Marty down low and eventually drove her and Patrick, eventually allowed for her and Patrick to meet and fall in love. But without that, she wouldn't have grown out of her princess phase that she had going. Well, what I refer to as the princess phase. Meaning there would be no her and Patrick, which means there would be no Cole Thornhart for Star to get with and have a child have the child Hope Manning Thornhart born to. So that's another thing that people don't think about, is how that one situation helped raise for other things down the line to occur. And another one, Todd and Marty, as much as people like to believe it, would not have been a couple. And I know there's people out there who disagree with me saying that. Oh, but they were good together. They showed promise, and they would have been together. Marty, at the time when she was tutoring Todd, which is actually during the time the rape occurred, Marty viewed Todd as a big dumb jock character, meaning she saw nothing good about him. He was stupid, he was a frat boy. That was his best qualities in her mind. And Todd viewed her as a stuck-up princess who, who was nice enough to grace the town with her greatness and take pity on this poor football player who needed help. That's how they viewed each other, and it didn't change. It actually got worse after the rape, and it made sense that it did. But without that, Marty would have tutored him, and that would have been all there was to it. There would have been no relationship between the two down the line. And like I said earlier, Powell, if the rape hadn't occurred, Powell wouldn't have had his breakdown that led to Todd's eventual belief in the town believing that Todd was assaulting the nurses at the hospital. Well, this also means him and Rebecca couldn't have happened, which means Todd's redemption wouldn't have happened. Powell would have stayed as he was, and he would have been the lackey to wherever. He would have been the lackey that he was, serving whatever Todd wanted, doing whatever he wanted, and eventually he would either have gotten better, and eventually, while being the lackey, he would have either gotten in more trouble or wound up dead because of the way Todd acted, instead of having the breakdown, which eventually led to him getting help to become a better to become sane again, and getting better and becoming his own person. Also, Todd and Vicky would not have become close, as Todd would not have been revealed as the legitimate heir. Which means Todd and Jessica wouldn't have become close, proving he had a heart and that he actually did become protective of those he cared about. But there's also another catch to that. Because nobody cared about Todd and him being written out, Vicky would not have had anybody to become close to because of that. She would have just had the family she knew, and when she had her mental break and the Victor Lord personality came out, I'd love to know how they would have written that deal. Because Victor Lord Sr. was a prick on all levels. So about the only way that Todd not doing what he did, about Todd not being there, would have done anything, is if Vicky would have ended up in some way assaulting her children. Either choking, beating. She would have had to done something to her children instead of Victor Lord personality taking out his rage and stuff towards Todd. The Victor Lord personality would turn toward the children. Because if you watch in the story, Victor was meanest to his daughter, Victoria, aka Vicky. Tina, he just flat out ignored. But my bet is that Victoria, under the Victor Lord personality, would have actually wound up paying somebody to hurt her children in some way and have no recollection of it, only for it to later be revealed, and Vicky would have wound up locked up in a sanitarium for the rest of her life because she couldn't get the personalities under control because they got open too frequently. Also, Jessica, Marty, and Court's son CJ would not be alive today because Todd wasn't there to save their lives when the car wreck occurred with the police transport. My bet, still, 9 times out of 10, says that another bus or something, or a car, or another car, or another prison transport would have been involved on the road that night, so the wreck would have occurred. But without Todd there, Marty, Jessica, and CJ would have all died in that car wreck because it was going over a cliff. So they would have all died. And so that means there would have been no Hope. I mean, not Hope, but there would be no Bree, and there would be no Ryder as well. And Christian and Antonio would not have been as important, and Nash would never have been brought on the show because there would be no Jessica to have the mental breakdown. Christian and Antonio wouldn't have really been as important because Jessica's relationship with them helped to solidify their characters being accepted in the town a lot more. Otherwise, they'd just been the daughter. I mean, they would have just been the sons of the maid the maid that eventually came down the restaurant. I forget her name, and I'm sorry for that. So, see, that also, Todd and Taya wouldn't have happened because Todd's relationship with Blair was leading to a divorce, and Todd wanted custody of his children, wanted custody of Star. And while Todd's initial divorce was to get the annulment from Blair, well, without Marty's rape, Todd and Blair wouldn't have got together because the Todd Manning character would have been scrapped, and this would have led to Blair being with somebody else, so there would be no need for Taya to have been brought on the show as an attorney to serve for a divorce against Blair at the time. So there would be no need for Todd and Taya to have gotten together because Todd wouldn't have existed, which means Danielle or Daniela, I keep forgetting how her name's actually pronounced, but Danny, that is the name she chose to go by, would not have been born eventually. So now you see why I'm against rewrites and keeping things as they were. Though there are some things you can rewrite and it won't have as big an effect. Because another example of a rewrite they did was to fit the Luke Spencer storyline that they did before he left, where Luke had become this evil person. And many thought, okay, it's just somebody that looks like Luke that's doing it. The thing is, it was actually Luke having a fugue state matter where Luke created this personality known as Fluke by the people, or fake Luke, or fugue Luke, however you want to look at it. They came up with many reasons why it was called Fluke, but that was the name they gave to it. And it was actually a retcon of his history. In the original story that had been there since the 70s, when Luke and Bobby Spencer were little, they had an abusive father named Tim Spencer who would beat the crap out of them and their mother, Lena. Well, one day Tim got really drunk, went too far, beat her so bad that he bust her appendix. She laid on the floor and died in front of her children before anybody could get there. Those children sat there for days with that body, and which to me actually made a lot of sense for why why Luke and Bobby turned out the way they did afterwards with that story. Well, then they did the retcon of it later on in more recent years and changed the history, where Luke had come home, their older sister Pat, or Patricia Spencer, was wearing a pair of jeans. And Lena was waiting on Tim to come home because they were going to have his dinner together. Well, they told Luke to go home and change. And they told Luke to go upstairs, get cleaned up because he got dirty from a baseball game he was in. Lena was in a pair of jeans. A pair of pants. Which, during that time, was not considered to be ladylike, and it bugged Tim Spencer a lot. More than it should have, to where he would become abusive towards them for that reason alone. So Lena went to get changed. Well, Tim happened to make it home before this could all happen, and they were getting into an argument. Tim had already been drinking. And him and Luke and Lena, he started to go after Luke and Patricia saying that they were being disrespectful children because they were actually standing up to him for once. Well, then Lena stepped in and was trying to deal with it. I mean, trying to diffuse the situation, make things okay, as she was trying to protect her children from Tim. Well, Tim started to beat on her. Luke grabbed the baseball bat, raised it up, ready to swing at ready to hit his father. When Tim said he wouldn't have the guts to do it, Luke drug the bat back, and he wound up, according to the way this retcon went, he accidentally hit his mother, killing her because he hit her on the head. So, I have a question about that now. If you're going to change that where Luke hit her in the head and it caused her to die from that, where does the burst appendix come in? Because the head and the appendix are in two different areas. This is the head. The appendix is in your torso area. So what they did makes no sense in the change. And then Tim just ran off and left them. Luke had a temporary mental break in that moment where he sat in a corner, huddled up. Patricia had come back with their cousin, Bill Eckert, and his family. Well, in order to make things better, Patricia went to stay with, I think in the story it said some family somewhere else. Luke and Bobby were sent to live with their Aunt Ruby in Florida. Apparently, the people in this version of the story didn't know what Ruby did for a living. And which led to Bobby and Luke's current situation. In the original version, they knew what Ruby did. It didn't mention Bill Eckert or any of them, but it did mention Ruby, and it mentioned what Ruby did in the past when Luke and Bobby went to live with them as kids. And Luke and Bobby originally, because they didn't want to be separated, got on the bus and went to live with Ruby. I highly recommend watching Luke's Christmas Carol, as I refer to it. But it's one of the General Hospital Christmas things where Luke does a version of a Christmas Carol. And you can tell it wasn't that long. You can tell at the time that it occurred, it was in the 2002 on era. I mean, 2002 to 2010 time. Because it's got Greg Vaughn playing the role of Lucky Spencer in the story. But I highly recommend that because I believe that to be a more truthful version of the Luke Spencer history, and it actually kept with the 70s story that was given from the beginning and had been kept all the way through the 2000s until the fake Luke, fugue state Luke, whatever you want to call it, storyline came about, and they retconned that history as to why Luke became the way he did. And also, the tattoo Luke's got on his arm with the dragon, or whatever, he got it as a way to remind him of his dark side, so that he wouldn't forget his father's actions and the person he wanted to avoid becoming. The thing about it is that Luke always was like that, where he didn't want to become like his father. Which is why a lot of times he couldn't stay in one place, because he feared that he would become complacent, driving him to the point of his drinking getting so bad that he would become abusive towards his children. And that's something, like I said, this is why I'm against rewrites a lot of the time. And as I've stated, there are some rewrites you can do that it's okay because the effects are minimal and it doesn't completely change everything about it. But the effects aren't. When you do a rewrite, you got to think of it like tossing a pebble or a stone into a lake. The little ripple effect that it causes. Because that stone going in the water makes the water completely different now. Because the ripple grows bigger and bigger as it moves outward. So that one little effect that nobody thinks matters has that big effect on this area. And then it affects that area even more. And then that even more. So by the end of it, you could have something like Oh, let's go back. Let's kill Hitler. Yeah, but you could have given rise to a new, bigger power in the process. I'm still up for the theory of killing Hitler, actually, if it was possible. But that's because I don't know what the side effects of it would be, and it causes a worry in me if I did do it. Will we get okay? Another example of what happened if with time, I mean, with the effects and changing history. Look at the movie 12 Monkeys. That explains how changing history changes the future in some way. So, again, if you're going to do rewrites of soap operas or something like that, make sure you actually think about what you're changing and how it affects it. Until next time, before I do that, um, leave your comments in the at the bottom. Leave me some comments about your thoughts on rewrites and if there's anything you would change. Also, help me out. Give me something to do for another video because I actually do read these comments because I want to know what you all think. And if you can, get other people to come and view this so that they might have their view on it as well if they'd like to share. Because I would like to know what anybody thinks. I like having discussions, and if I could, I would do a live stream, but my computer has issues with the idea, and apparently internet's an issue with it as well or something, because anytime I try to run it, it doesn't work. So that's the only reason I haven't done live stream videos. So, like I said, leave me comments on what you would, if you would do a rewrite, what you would rewrite. And also, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the ABC soap operas. Like I said, the only reason I do those is because they're the ones I know. And I grew up on and I was in love with for so long. And I still watch to this day. So, like I said, leave me something in the comments about if you do the rewrites, what you would rewrite, as well as what you would like for me to do an upcoming video on. Till then, I'm your host, and have a good day.